She was only 4 years old when she remembered dying. She said she'd been someone else, a woman from another city with a husband, a house, and a death she could still feel. At first, they thought it was a child's fantasy, but then she mentioned names, described places she'd never seen, and recognized a man she'd never met, who swore she was his dead wife. What started as a story became one of the most investigated cases in history, and what they found changed everything we know about life, death, and what waits in between. The reincarnation of Shanti Devi, a true story that defied death. In 1930s Delhi, a quiet little girl began to speak words that didn't belong to her world. She was only 4 when she stopped responding to her own name and started insisting she was someone else, a woman from another city, another life, another death. Her parents dismissed it as childish imagination, until the girl described a house she'd never seen, a husband she'd never met, and the sensation of dying in childbirth as if she were reliving it, gasping, convulsing, her eyes rolling back before whispering, "I'm not supposed to be here." The name she spoke, Lugdi Devi, was real. The husband she claimed, Kidder Nath, existed. And the town she described, Mathura, was over 100 miles away. With each passing year, her memories sharpened, not faded. She remembered the color of the walls, the placement of furniture, the hidden stash of coins beneath her bed. She even described scars on the husband's body, intimate marks no stranger could know. When the story spread, Delhi turned into a circus of curiosity and fear. Reporters, priests, and skeptics swarmed her home, trying to break the illusion. But when she was finally taken to Mathura, escorted by investigators, the impossible happened. Shanti Devi pointed out streets she had never walked, recognized her former husband in the crowd, and burst into tears. "You promised we'd meet again," she said. The man's face drained of color. Every word she spoke matched details only Lugdi Devi had known. Then came the twist that haunted witnesses for life. She refused to step inside her old home, saying she could still feel her body buried nearby. When the officials dug into local records, they found Lugdi Devi had indeed died years earlier, her body interred precisely where Shanti pointed. The story went beyond gossip. It reached the ears of Mahatma Gandhi, who sent a committee to investigate. The findings? Disturbingly consistent. But the deeper they searched, the stranger it grew. Shanti predicted things she couldn't have known. And when Gandhi's team tried to test her, changing names, swapping rooms, lying about who was who, she corrected them all. One investigator wrote, "Either we are witnessing reincarnation, or something even more terrifying, a mind reaching beyond the grave." Yet the true horror came later, when Shanti began to lose herself in the memories. Her identity fractured between 2 lives, 2 timelines colliding. She started speaking as if both souls were trapped in one body, both struggling to breathe through the same mouth. Witnesses said her voice would change mid-sentence, one soft and feminine, the other low and grieving. Some claimed she could describe events from after Lugdi's death, things she should not have seen. And when her parents tried to suppress the story, her dreams turned violent. She'd wake screaming that she was buried alive, that her baby was calling her from underground. Doctors said hysteria, priests said possession, but the villagers whispered that Shanti Devi wasn't just remembering, she was unfinished, that her rebirth had cracked open a doorway no one could close. Years later, when she was grown, she refused marriage, saying, "I already have a husband, and he's waiting in another life." She lived haunted and half alive, trapped between existence and echo. Even today, skeptics cite her as folklore, yet none can explain how a child with no education, no travel, and no contact with the outside world could have recited a dead woman's life in chilling detail. Perhaps she wasn't reincarnated. Perhaps something deeper happened, a consciousness misfired, a past life bleeding through a fracture in time. And as her final recorded words suggest, the truth may be far darker than rebirth. Before her death, she whispered to a visitor, "Lugdi still dreams. Through me." By the time the whispers reached Mahatma Gandhi himself, Shanti Devi's name had become something between a miracle and a curse. Skeptics called her delusional, devotees called her proof of eternal life. But Gandhi wanted truth, not belief. In 1936, he assembled a commission of 15 men lawyers, professors, journalists, and skeptics to travel with the girl to Mathura. Their purpose? Expose the fraud, if any existed. The journey was supposed to debunk her. Instead, it dismantled reality. As the train rattled toward the city she swore was her home, Shanti grew silent, trembling as if the closer she came, the heavier another life pressed down on her chest. When they arrived, she refused directions, walking ahead of the group through narrow alleys she'd never visited in this lifetime. "It's this way," she murmured, turning corners unprompted. Then, suddenly, she stopped. "Here," she said. Before her stood a faded yellow house. My home. The officials exchanged glances. The address matched the one of Shanti Devi, dead 9 years earlier. Inside, the air felt different. Shanti pointed to a window. "That's where I waited for him," she whispered. And when they brought in Kedarnath, the widower, she stepped back, covering her mouth. Tears welled up before words did. "You cut your hair shorter," she said, voice shaking. "But you still have that mole behind your left ear." Kedar froze. The mark was real. She asked about their child, naming him, recalling a promise she'd made as Lugdi on her deathbed, a promise no one else had heard. Kedar broke down. The investigators, hardened men of science, scribbled furiously. But one later confessed he couldn't write fast enough. His hands were trembling. Shanti moved through rooms as if guided by ghosts, identifying where she had hidden jewelry, where her baby had slept, even where she'd spilled milk the night she went into labor. Everything matched. Then, unprompted, she asked to visit her old house's temple. They took her, and before anyone could speak, she knelt and began chanting a prayer in a regional dialect of Mathura, one she had never been exposed to in Delhi. One of the linguists in the team whispered, "She shouldn't know this. She's never been taught." But the horror deepened when Shanti suddenly stopped, looking at a courtyard well. "They burned my body there," she said, her voice flat. "But I remember watching from above, as if the fire didn't hurt anymore." Some of the officials turned away, pale. When the team later checked burial records, they found that Lugdi Devi's cremation site was precisely where Shanti had pointed. For days, the commission interrogated her, changing names, rearranging rooms, showing false photos to test her. Every lie fell apart in her gaze. She corrected them each time with unsettling precision. "You're trying to trick me," she said once without anger, "but I still remember dying." The investigators returned to Delhi shaken, their report unable to conclude anything beyond the inexplicable. The girl's statements were consistent with a woman dead nearly a decade. Gandhi's notes on the case, later lost in archives, supposedly ended with a single line, "If this child lies, truth itself has died." Yet the nightmare didn't end with validation. It deepened. Shanti's parents said she began to change. She would stare at her reflection for hours, whispering that her face was wrong. Sometimes she'd call out to people who weren't there, "Mother, my other mother." And sometimes, in the dead of night, she'd write letters to Kedarnath, signed not as Shanti Devi, but as Lugdi. When questioned, she said she couldn't control it, that the hand moved on its own. Psychologists were called, priests too. Both left uneasy, each offering explanations that didn't fit. Was it reincarnation? Possession? Split identity? Or something far more dangerous? A consciousness that had learned how to cheat death, but not how to leave it behind? After the investigation, Delhi quieted, but inside Shanti Devi's mind, the noise never stopped. What was supposed to end with the truth only opened something that refused to close. The nights became longer. She would wake, drenched in sweat, whispering to someone unseen, "I told you I'd come back." At first, her parents thought it was the stress of all the attention, the endless reporters and letters, but soon her voice began to change. It wasn't just her words, it was her tone, her cadence, her very being. Sometimes she spoke softly and submissively, like the married woman she once claimed to be. Other times, she was defiant, older, bitter. One evening, her mother caught her standing in front of a mirror, combing her hair and murmuring he liked it braided like this. But when confronted, Shanti blinked as if waking from a trance and said, "Why are you calling me that name?" She had begun to forget who Shanti even was. Doctors came, then priests, then scholars, all eager to label what they couldn't explain. Reincarnation, some said. Possession, others whispered. But as the weeks turned into months, the boundary between her two identities dissolved entirely. Witnesses said she sometimes switched names mid-sentence, referring to herself as both I and she, crying for her lost child and her lost life in the same breath. During prayers, she'd faint suddenly, clutching her chest, screaming about fire and childbirth. One night, her father found her scribbling in the dark, pages of handwriting that didn't match her own, written in the dialect of Muchara. When asked why she was writing, she replied in a voice not her own, "He needs to know, I remember." The next day, a letter arrived at her home from Kedarnath, the widower she once called her husband. He had received a note days earlier, signed not by Shanti, but by Shanti Devi. He swore the handwriting was his late wife's. When the family accused her of sending it, Shanti denied it, trembling. "I didn't write it," she said, "but I saw her do it through my hands." Soon, shadows began to play tricks on her mind. She'd wake at night to the sound of a crying baby, though no child was in the house. Her mirror reflections would sometimes blink slower than she did. She claimed she could feel 2 heartbeats in her chest, 2 lives struggling to fit into one fragile frame. Then came the moment that shattered even the skeptics. During a small religious gathering, as the priest recited a mantra for cleansing, Shanti collapsed and began speaking in fluent Sanskrit, a language she had never studied. Her voice was lower, older, almost masculine. When she awoke, she had no memory of what she'd said. The priest left pale, muttering that her soul was carrying unfinished business. Her parents tried to move her, change cities, change everything, but it was too late. Shanti Devi had become a vessel caught between times, haunted by a self that refused to die. In her dreams, she no longer saw Lugdi's face. She was Lugdi, gasping in childbirth, trapped between the scream and the silence, reliving her death in infinite replay. Sometimes she'd wake laughing, other times crying, whispering that she could see the bridge, a place between lives. By her teens, her eyes had changed. They said she carried the exhaustion of 2 lifetimes in one stare. She rarely smiled. When asked if she still remembered her past life, she said something that unsettled everyone. "I don't remember it anymore. I live it." By the time Shanti turned 16, she had stopped talking about reincarnation, not because she no longer believed, but because she feared what answering might awaken. The newspapers had stopped writing, Gandhi's commission had faded into history, and the public's fascination had moved on. Yet in the quiet of her home, the haunting never left. She had become thin, sleepless, and strangely distant, as though her mind was watching life from another room. Her parents said she often stared at empty corners and smiled faintly, whispering things no one could hear. "She's speaking to her past," her mother said once, trembling. At first, they dismissed it as habit until one night, the lights began to flicker, and Shanti started laughing, not in joy, but in recognition. "She's here," she said softly. "I can feel her again." Her voice layered, 2 tones overlapping, one childlike, one mature and mournful. From that night onward, every mirror in the house was covered with cloth, because reflections began to show what should not be there. Her mother swore she saw another face behind Shanti's, the faint outline of a woman. Older, wearing traditional bridal jewelry. They called priests to cleanse the home. The prayers made Shanti scream in agony, thrashing on the floor, crying out names no one in the family knew. When she awoke, her eyes were bloodshot and blank. "He shouldn't have done that," she said. Now she's angry. Soon, objects began to move. not violently, but deliberately. The family's oil lamp would extinguish itself at sunset, even when no wind blew. Footsteps echoed in the courtyard long after everyone was asleep. One night, Shanti's father caught her standing barefoot outside, in the rain, humming an old lullaby that Shanti Devi had sung to her son decades before. "I had to make sure he's sleeping," she whispered when he pulled her back inside, her dress soaked, her skin cold as stone. The doctors called it dissociative trauma, but no diagnosis explained the impossible. When Shanti's handwriting changed again, the letters looping in patterns identical to Lugdi's last known letters, her father burned the papers in fear. Yet the next morning, they reappeared under her pillow, unburned, the ink still wet. As weeks passed, her body weakened. She began speaking of visions, saying that sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could see both worlds at once, her family in Delhi and her past home in Mathura, overlapping like reflections on water. "They're merging," she said, "and when they finally touch, I won't know which one I'm in." Her mother begged her to stop talking like that, but Shanti only smiled, empty-eyed. "You can't kill a memory," she said. Then came the night no one forgot. Neighbors awoke to screams, deep, raw, unearthly. When her parents burst into her room, they found Shanti levitating inches above the bed. Her body contorted, her eyes wide open but unseeing. "She's trying to come through," Shanti rasped in a voice not her own. The lamps shattered. Every clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. When she finally fell, she went silent for hours, her pulse almost gone. At dawn, she sat up, calm, and said, "I remember the moment between breaths. It's not light. It's sound, like a hum that never ends." After that, Shanti refused to sleep. "If I dream, she'd finish coming," she explained. Her father sent her away to live with relatives in another town, but it made no difference. The haunting followed. She began drawing strange symbols on the walls, intricate circles of ash and soot. When asked what they meant, she said it's the path she's taking to return. Through me, villagers started avoiding the house. Rumors spread that she could predict deaths, that when she touched someone's hand, she'd whisper their fate before collapsing. But the most disturbing claim came from her cousin, who swore that one night he heard two women sobbing in Shanti's room, though only one shadow moved beneath the door. By 1945, a decade after the world first heard of Shanti Devi, most believed her story had faded into myth. But one man couldn't let it go: Professor H.N. Banerjee, one of the original investigators from Gandhi's committee. He had spent years haunted by what he'd seen in Mathura, a child describing secrets no one could have fed her. A girl torn between lives. When strange rumors began to resurface, that Shanti was writing in two different handwritings, that her body temperature dropped unnaturally low during her trances, that she could describe places no longer standing, Banerjee returned to Delhi. What he found wasn't the girl he remembered. Shanti was now a young woman, frail and expressionless, her eyes distant, her voice hollow. The moment he entered the room, she greeted him without introduction. "You came back. You promised." He froze. It was the exact phrase Shanti Devi had spoken to him during his interviews with Kedarnath years earlier. Banerjee began to suspect what no one dared to say. What if the memories weren't coming from inside her, but through her? He convinced Shanti's family to let him observe her again, this time privately. He brought documents, old letters, and photographs, things she should not have seen. But when he showed her one of Lugdi's wedding photos, she became rigid. Her pupils dilated, her lips quivered, and in a trembling voice she said, "You shouldn't have brought that. She's close now." Within minutes, her nose began to bleed. The air in the room grew heavy, cold. Then her voice changed again, older, broken, sorrowful. "You're looking in the wrong life," she whispered. There was another before Lugdi. Banerjee's pen froze. "Another?" he asked. "Yes," she said, staring through him. "He found me then too." What followed would never appear in official reports. Shanti described in terrifying detail the life of a woman who died before Shanti Devi was even born, a temple dancer murdered in the late 1800s. Her body buried beneath a ruined shrine in Mathura. She spoke of her killer, calling him by a name Banerjee recognized, a relative of Lugdi's family, long dead. The professor dismissed it as coincidence until he investigated. Weeks later, records confirmed that the ruins existed and that human remains had indeed been unearthed there decades earlier. But the discovery came with a horrifying twist. The bones were found with a small charm engraved with initials, the same initials Shanti had written repeatedly in her trances. Suddenly, the reincarnation theory began to unravel. What if Shanti wasn't the soul of Shanti Devi reborn, but something else entirely? A vessel through which multiple unfinished lives were bleeding together. Banerjee's colleagues begged him to drop the case, but he refused. The more he researched, the more disturbing patterns emerged. Every time Shanti remembered a past life, an unmarked grave somewhere in India seemed to surface. It was as if her memories were maps, coordinates of forgotten deaths. When Banerjee confronted her one last time, she smiled faintly and said, "You think I'm remembering?" "No, they're remembering through me." Days later, Banerjee's notes vanished. His journal, containing years of evidence, was never found. Soon after, he left Delhi, reportedly suffering from hallucinations and insomnia, muttering that he'd looked too deep into the wrong soul. Meanwhile, Shanti withdrew completely, refusing interviews, refusing light, refusing mirrors. In her final recorded meeting, she said something that chilled every witness present. "People think I'm reborn, but I was never gone. We are not born again. We just wake up where we left off." Her eyes rolled back, and for the first time, she spoke in 3 distinct voices, each overlapping, crying, whispering. One of them said, "He's still looking for me." No one could tell which life was speaking. Years passed, and the world forgot her name. Shanti Devi, once the child who defied science and history, became a ghost among the living, walking, breathing, but hollow. She lived quietly in Delhi, refusing visitors, sunlight, and the mention of her past. Those who saw her said she looked ageless, like someone paused between decades. She never married, never smiled for photographs, and spoke less with each year, as if every word risked summoning something she could no longer control. But the past has a way of finding those who carry it. In 1970, an old journalist sought her out, hoping to revisit India's reincarnated girl. At first, she refused, but eventually agreed to one final interview on the condition that it not be published until after her death. The journalist described her home as unnervingly quiet, the curtains drawn, mirrors covered. A faint humming filled the air, like a tune trapped between walls. Shanti sat across from him, frail but steady. "You still want to know the truth?" she asked. He nodded. What followed was a confession that shattered the boundary between sanity and nightmare. "They never stopped coming," she said softly. "Not just Lugdi. Others. So many others." She spoke of nights when she'd feel her mind split into fragments, each one filled with memories not her own. Women dying in childbirth, men lost at sea, children buried before they spoke their first word. "When they die with fear," she whispered, "they don't cross over. They cling to anyone who listens." She believed she had become their bridge, not reborn, but reused. Then she revealed something darker. Lugdi wasn't the first voice. She was the loudest. The journalist, shaken, asked how she could bear it. Shanti smiled faintly. "You don't bear it. You dissolve," she said. Sometimes she'd wake to find names carved into her walls in handwriting that wasn't hers. Some mornings she'd find old soil on her hands, as if she'd been digging. "They keep finding their way back," she said. "And every time one leaves, another arrives." The journalist's recorder stopped twice during the interview, as if time itself resisted her words. Near the end, she looked past him, eyes widening, and said, "She's here!" When he turned, no one was there, but he swore the temperature dropped instantly, his breath visible in the air. Shanti's pupils dilated. "She's tired of waiting," she whispered. "She wants her life back." Then, her head tilted slowly, unnaturally, and she spoke in a voice far older, calmer. "I told you I'd come again." The journalist fled, leaving his recorder behind. When he returned the next morning, the house was empty. No Shanti, no sound, only the faint scent of sandalwood and ash. Her neighbors said they'd seen her the night before, walking down the street in a white sari, barefoot, humming that same low lullaby from her childhood, the one Lugdi used to sing. Days later, her body was found near the old railway tracks outside Delhi, seated upright against a tree, eyes open, expression peaceful. But the autopsy revealed something impossible. Her fingerprints didn't match previous records. They belonged to no one alive. And carved into the dirt beside her was a single sentence, written in both Hindi and Sanskrit. "The cycle is not rebirth. It's return." After her death, the journalist's tape was recovered. The final seconds captured a faint hum, not static, not interference, but what sounded like a woman's voice overlapping with Shanti's own, whispering, "We remember." To this day, no one knows how many souls spoke through her, or whether any of them ever found peace. All that remains is the story and a name that became a warning: Shanti Devi, the girl who remembered too much and forgot to stop. They called it reincarnation, they called it proof of the soul. But what if it was something else? What if remembering isn't a gift, but a glitch? A fracture in time where lives overlap and one consciousness refuses to die? Shanti Devi didn't prove that death has an afterlife. She proved that death might not even work. And maybe, somewhere she's still remembering,